So welcome to ICAS. I'm Sarah Chisnell, Director of Public Affairs here, and I also lead our research programme as well as our big work programme we're doing called Shaping the Profession, which is looking at the skill sets that professionals in general, but obviously particularly accountants, will need in the next 10, 20 and 30 years. I'm delighted that we can host today's meeting. We were a bit of a last minute choice, but hopefully you'll come back, Susan. And I'm a bit of a political and policy nerd, so I get really excited about stuff to do with David Hume because I went to Glasgow University 40 years ago next month and studied, obviously, David Hume and John Locke and Descartes and all of his other influences. ICAS, very, very proud of our Scottish history. We are actually the oldest financial professional institute in the world, having been established in 1854. We may be smaller than some of the bigger ones, but we're definitely older and wiser, I would say. I should also say that I'm not a chartered accountant. I feel I have to apologise for that on a regular basis. The statistics that we're going to be listening to and discussing this morning, as I said, because I'm a nerd, I find them fascinating. I also find them quite frightening, some of what you'll have read in the press release yesterday and anything else you've seen in coverage in terms of immigration coming to the fore. And when I arrived here 40 years ago as an immigrant, but only from England, I was constantly told that Scotland didn't ever have an immigration problem and there was no racism in Scotland either, other than that directed towards myself as a Sassenach. But it is really worrying, in my view, to see these trends, but we are seeing them across the UK. And also some really interesting stats on how people are feeling about the economic outlook and how that impacts on them and their everyday lives, and including, as we will hear, impacts on what they're buying and what they're eating. So I'm sure we're going to have a great discussion, some really good questions, and I will now hand you over to Susan Murray, who you all know is Director of the Institute.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. For those of you that I've not met before, welcome. I'm Susan Murray, Director of the David Hume Institute, as Sarah said. Sarah is truth, as no one ever really gets away once you meet me, I'm afraid. So we met in a toilet queue. And we'd been meaning to meet for ages, but it was the toilet queue that was very productive. So I think when we talk about productivity, never forget that actually toilet queues can be very good for you. And they were very long, but it was a very productive conversation, and I thank ICAS for hosting us today because we are very grateful. I'm delighted to welcome you to this briefing on the latest Understanding Scotland Economy Tracker. The tracker is our quarterly survey we undertake with the Diffley Partnership to ensure the everyday lives of people behind the economic headlines stay front of mind. The results you heard today were collected just a few weeks ago in the first week of August. Before the main discussions get underway, and to keep you all safe, I'd just like to confirm there are no fire alarms this morning, and if the fire alarm does go off, please head to the nearest exit, which is actually the door behind you. We're recording the event, which is why the speakers have microphones, but they do not amplify in the room. So if anyone is hard of hearing at the back, please do feel free to move nearer the front, and we'll make space for you because it's chock-a-block this morning. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Scott Edgar is Senior Research Manager at the Diffley Partnership. He will present the latest Understanding Scotland Economy Tracker findings, which track the economic confidence and buying intentions over time, as well as helping us to understand and monitor economic attitudes and public opinion. Following Scott will be Lesley-Anne Gray. Lesley-Anne is Strategic Insight Director for Scotland at the World Panel by Numerator, which many of you may remember from last year, called Kantar. They provide brands and retailers with a unique 360-degree understanding of consumer behaviour around the world. And last year, we were lucky enough to learn about the baskets of Scottish consumers and how perhaps what we're sometimes told in perceptions is different from the behaviour and what they see in baskets. So we're really lucky that Lesley-Anne is sharing some of the insights that only usually get to go to her clients. So thank you for sharing those with us. And following Lesley-Anne will be David Isa. David is Director of Research, Analysis and Investigations at Consumer Scotland, which is the statutory and independent consumer advocacy organisation for Scotland. David oversees the organisation's research into consumer attitudes, behaviours and harms, and its analysis of the impact on consumers of policy and technological change. Previously, David was Deputy Director at the Fraser Valander Institute, which I think is probably the last time you spoke with us a few years ago. And during that time, he acted as an advisor to the Scottish Parliament's Finance Committee and was Commissioner on the Scottish Government's Policy and Inequality Commission. Then after we've heard reflections from both Leslie Ann and David, we'll come to the room for questions. It is a short, fast event. So if you have questions, please get your hands up straight away. Don't dilly-dally, because we will not get through all the questions, as is proven at past events. So without further ado, over to Scott.
Good morning, everybody. So, as Susan said, Understanding Scotland Economy Tracker is a quarterly survey that looks at economic attitudes and public attitudes of Scots. The survey was in field from the 1st to the 5th of August, and the results that you see today are based on the responses of 2,190 respondents and weighted to be representative of the population. So I always start on this cheery slide, which is the one about how people kind of feel about the way that the country is going. So it's a very broad question. It leaves it very much to people's interpretation in terms of how they might think right or wrong direction is. But it gives a sense of feeling in the country about where things are headed. So 6 in 10 people in Scotland continue to think that things in Scotland are going in the wrong direction. That's down 1 percentage point from last time, and it's not the highest we've had on record. The highest we had on record would have been in around May last year when it was at 62%, but nevertheless we remain at around 6 in 10 people telling us that they think things in Scotland are going in the wrong direction. And there's some demographic differences in there, as you might expect. Those aged 65 plus are more likely to think things in Scotland are going in the wrong direction than younger Scots. And equally, those in the most deprived neighbourhoods are more likely to think things in Scotland are going in the wrong direction compared to those in the most deprived neighbourhoods. But nevertheless, it's still a majority of people in SIMD 5 neighbourhoods that think things in Scotland are headed in the wrong direction. So that gives you a kind of overarching sense of how people feel things are in Scotland at the minute. One thing we've been tracking for a long time now is people's priorities in Scotland. So what we ask people to do here is select from a very, very long list things that the top 3 issues facing Scotland today. And pretty consistently what we've found now for, going on 2 years really, is that healthcare and NHS and cost of living are the top 2 priorities of people in Scotland, and those are consistently picked to be the top 2. So around half of people tell us that healthcare and NHS is amongst their top 3 priorities, followed by cost of living and inflation at around 4 in 10 telling us that. And again, as you can see here, that's been pretty consistent. There had actually been, at the start of the year, a bit of a drop-off actually in people selecting cost of living and inflation, but that's balanced itself back out, and it's kind of slightly on the rise again over the last few waves, which is quite interesting to see. The elephant in the room is the kind of 1 in 5 people now selecting immigration as one of their top 3 issues. And for a few of these series now, we've had a sort of cluster of issues around here in this sort of 1 in 5 people saying that it was amongst the top 3 issues. And in that sort of bucket of issues, if you want, there was kind of poverty, inequality, the economy, trust in politics, and housing. Effectively, I've been saying for quite a few of these presentations now, something's going to break out of that, and we're not quite sure what it is. And for the election next year, what might be the thing? I don't think we're really anticipating the sort of big increase that we've seen in immigration as an issue over the series, especially over the last few waves. So to give a sort of, and there's loads of things it's a really long list. So one thing that I will raise is you'll see figures going around, especially in news bulletins in the last couple of days from YouGov and Ipsos around polling on immigration that's been done in relation to the speech that Nigel Farage made yesterday. And what I would say about we've got a longer list on Understanding Scotland, so it's just kind of worth bearing that in mind when you see those figures. So not everything's on that chart in terms of issues, and here's some selected issues that don't quite make the chart because we cut it off at around 10% for visual purposes because it's already quite busy. But as you can see, 10% selected social care, 10% selected mental health and well-being. The environment and climate change still down at around 8% of people put in their top 3 issues. That's previously been much higher in the series. Ageing population at 6%, constitution devolution 1 in 10, and transport down at 3%. And it does differ by, the kind of priorities people pick does differ by different demographics. So, here's a very, very simple, 2 different kind of demographics to look at. Those aged 16 to 34, the youngest in the sample, and then those aged 65 plus are male and female. And what you'll see here is there's a lot of consistency at that top level in terms of that healthcare and NHS and cost of living and inflation are the top 2 priorities amongst all of those groups. But immigration has become a kind of top issue amongst quite, it wasn't previously on this table in previous presentations, and now we see that actually it's quite high up amongst basically all the demographics that we're looking at, including those aged 16 to 34, and then, for example, housing sort of pops in there for that one. But what this kind of shows is there's actually quite a lot of consistency amongst the kind of top issues amongst Scots at the minute, which is, interesting to kind of dwell on. And then if we look at that kind of selection of immigration as a top issue across demographics, what we see here is this is actually increases since the last wave in May. So this is a percentage point increase in the proportion of people in each of these segments. So those aged 16 to 34, there's been a +3 percentage point change in the proportion of people picking immigration as a top issue. That's been +6 for 55 to 64. And social grade ABC1 and C2D, we see again +3 and +6 respectively. And then SIMD5 and SIMD1 here are reversed, but SIMD5, a 5 percentage point increase and a 4 percentage point increase amongst SIMD1. So this increase is happening across the board and happening across the range of demographics that we see. Interestingly, we took a look at the figures sort of for the last 2 years, so it's kind of worth saying that in May 2023 or August 2023, it was around 4% and 7% that were selecting immigration as a top free issue in Scotland. This chart here shows the kind of rapid increase that we've seen in that over the last few waves. A 5 percentage point increase between May and August alone. And if we take different sort of demographics within that as well, those aged 16 to 34 would have told us in May 2023, 5% would have had immigration in their top three issues compared to 16% now. Amongst those aged 65 plus, 10% would have had it in their top three issues compared to 22% now. And similarly, when we look at SIMD, if we go back to August 23, 10% would have said it was in their top three issues. That's 26% now. 7% of those in SIMD5 would have told us it was in their top three issues in August 23. That's 19% now. So what we're seeing is this increase is very rapid and it's happening across the board as an issue. And that leaves a lot of questions, I think, for people to sort of think about as we head into an election year next year in terms of immigration is not a devolved issue, but it's certainly going to be an issue that's on the table at the election. And how does it, how do you kind of have that discussion when you don't have maybe the powers, in the Parliament to sort of do anything about it, and you've also got something you've got this issue here, but it's something that's going to have to be discussed over the course of the election. And we're able to kind of look at this by different parties' support as well. So, for example, 73% of people who voted Reform at the 24 election would have immigration in their top three issues. 31% who voted Conservative would have it in their top three issues. 15% who voted SNP have it in their top three issues. And 17% who voted Labour last year have it in their top three issues. So again, it's still quite, a number, depending even on party support here, that has it in their top three issues. And I think there's a kind of discussion that we can have maybe in the Q&A about, what people sort of, how people kind of pitch on this basis going forward. But then we'll also look at economic priorities. So if we look here, the cost of living remains the top economic priority among Scots. 6 and 10 tell us that's their top priority, followed by living standards and wages, and then lack of spending on public services. This again has been pretty consistent over the last few waves in terms of the things that people select as their economic priorities. When we look kind of under the skin of this a little bit, we see that younger age groups are more likely to select cost of living and living standards and wages as their sort of top economic priorities, whereas older age groups are more likely to tell us that management of public finances and spending on public services is in their top three sort of economic issues. Again, this is cut off, this doesn't have everything on it, but we're always more than happy to share all of the kind of underlying data on it. But what you see here is a lot of stability in terms of economic issues. So, we're not seeing much change over the waves in terms of what people are prioritising from an economic point of view. And then economic outlook. So, this is a bit where I'm a bit like the Grim Reaper and I come every time saying everyone's miserable, but 7 in 10 people tell us that they think things have got worse over about 2/3 over the last year. And then 7 in 10 tell us that they think general economic conditions are going to get worse again over the next year. So there is this sort of state of, almost kind of permanent pessimism around it doesn't have to be permanent, I'm making it even worse than it sounds, but the kind of point is that people are generally not feeling good about the economy and they don't see it going forward. And also, kind of about half generally tell us that their, own personal financial circumstances have got worse over the last 12 months, and then going forward around a similar proportion that think they're going to get worse again over it. We're also seeing a kind of increase in people saying the same, but again, really sort of, +4 saying the same. So people are either thinking the general economic conditions now are going to get worse or stay the same. There's not a lot of people who generally think things are going to get better. This kind of difference in percentage as well between general and personal has always been there, and it's something you see a lot in sort of social research, is the idea that things that are wider are sort of worse, and then closer you think is better. There is a tendency for that. And then just as I've said that, I'm now going to contradict it a little bit when we look at this slide. So we take, on this side here, we're taking nets basically of people who say better and worse and subtracting them from each other. I have to do the health warning that this whole axis here is under 0%. So it's net negative in terms of people's outlook, and has been pretty much the whole time we've ran the series. Although you see the white line here is, that kind of general economic conditions, you think they're better or worse than they are now over the last 12 months. And this blue line here is own do you think general economic conditions will be better or worse over the next 12 months? And sort of, for the first time in a long time, we're sort of seeing that there's a wee bit more, the kind of pessimism here is basically completely like attached to each other now. So actually they're not really as different as they used to be in terms of net. Things are still better than they were at the floor here, which was about -90% net back in February, around February 23. But what we see here is we had seen a sort of increase over the last year in terms of it looked like things were moving in the right direction. People were becoming slightly more optimistic. That's sort of dipped again, and then it's not really building again. We're not really seeing much change in terms of people's economic outlook. People aren't feeling much better or much worse over the last few waves, but it seems like we're kind of stuck in this sort of funk of around 7 in 10 think it's going to get worse going forward, and just over 4 in 10 thinking their own personal financial circumstances are going to be worse going forward. So maybe next wave it'll be better. And then economic outlook here, this is the proportion of people who think that their financial situation is worse over the last 12 months, split by some demographics. So we see around half of women tell us that they think that their own personal financial circumstances are worse than they were 12 months ago, compared to 40% of men. And then if we look at education, those with no qualifications, about half tell them they think their own personal financial circumstances are worse now than last year, compared to around 4 in 10 at degree level, who have got degree level education telling us that. I'm going to point to this one over here because of this band here, so I'm just going to move. If we look at the sort of concerns with money matters, so we ask people basically, what have you done in the last 12 months as a result of concerns with money matters? Again, the top one that we see here is reduced non-essential spending, so that's a 3 percentage point increase from the last wave. Cutting back on leisure activities, around half of people telling us they're doing that, and a lot of these have been, this sort of pattern has been quite consistent over time, so these have been the sort of top things that people say they're doing. There has been some notable news this week in terms of, just this morning, that energy bills are going up more than people would have anticipated, so that'll be one to keep an eye on sort of as we go forward. There's also an element of seasonality in that finding with reducing heat or energy use. So in our kind of August and May surveys, we tend to see that less people say they've done that, and then we see in the kind of winter ones that people are more likely to say they've done it. Just, even though we asked them to think in the last 12 months, we still see that, probably just a wee bit of recall bias there. When we look at impacted mental health, around 3 in 10 are telling us that their mental health has been impacted, and less than 1 in 5 say they've not done anything. There's been no impact as a result of money matters in terms of their behaviour. And on this slide here, we just basically showing some percentage point, differences between different demographics on different measures. So you can see that, those aged 16 to 34 are far more likely to say, that concerns over money matters have impacted their mental health, more likely to say that they felt less effective at work as a result. And then when we look at another kind of notable finding on here that we like to highlight is that households with children are far more likely to tell us that concerns over money matters have, led to strained relationships at home. So there is something sort of beyond the economic decisions that people are making. There's a social impact as well that concerns over money matters are having with people in terms of their mental health, their relationships at home, their productivity at work. I'm going to kick over that water bottle. It's impacting people in sort of a myriad of different ways. I don't appreciate it standing right in front of it. And we also asked people about saving in this wave. So, we gave them a list of saving behaviours and asked them which of them applied to them. So we can see here that the top finding that we had here was that 35% of people told us that they struggle to save money as their income only covers essentials. about a quarter told us that they were currently saving money as they weren't sure what would happen with the economy. And then sort of, between kind of 1 and 5 and a quarter telling us they were either saving for a long-term goal or a short-term goal. 14% said that they spend less than they earn, so they're saving without really thinking about it. They're just accumulating money as a result of that. And 12% told us they prioritise spending rather than saving for anything. That was higher among sort of older age groups who were also less likely to say they were saving for a long-term goal and things like that, which we'll come on to in a second. And 1 in 10 tell us that they're saving money as they're not sure if their job or income is secure. So there's a sort of mix there of behaviours we can see. It's not uniform. A lot of people unable to save, other people saving for different goals. And then if we kind of split this up by age, so we see that those aged 16 to 34 and those aged 35 to 44 are the most likely to tell us that they're currently saving for a short-term goal, and also the most likely to tell us that they're saving for a long-term goal at about 4 in 10. So we're basically seeing here that people are, the people that are in these age groups are hoping to save. There's a bit of ambition there. They're trying to save for these longer-term goals. That tapers off with age. It kind of probably for the long-term goal. Logic applies as to why that might be, and other things like that. But that's basically what people are telling us. If we look at other kind of things, though, we see that those in the kind of middle age ranges are being squeezed by the cost of living here. And this is something that's probably worth thinking about a little bit. So we're seeing 16 to 34-year-olds are able to tell us that they're saving a bit more money for long-term goals and things like that. I think we've got to take a step back and think about what the living situation of a lot of 16 and 34-year-olds are as well. Actually, increasingly, people that age live at home are more able to maybe save for those things because they don't have the kind of day-to-day expenses that 16 to 34-year-olds might have had a couple of decades ago. So it's things like that I think are quite interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have a variable that says lives at home with parents, otherwise we could be able to look at that, but it's quite an interesting one. But we see here that people, in these kind of middle between 35 and 44 and 55 to 64, higher proportions of people telling us are struggling to save money as their income only covers essentials, so they can only pay for what they need to spend. And then here, that kind of I spend less than I earn, so I build up savings without planning to it. Again, you can see the kind of, you want to think about it kind of the opposite way, but in those kind of middle age categories, less people are able to say that they're just accumulating money because they spend less than they earn. And that's why I highlight the living situation for those aged 16 to 34, because I wonder how much that's got to do with that kind of higher proportion on 21% there. And then we asked a question about food. So how is food prices impacting your food choices in the last 6 months? So there's a downward trend in terms of the people telling us that there's just a number of times they eat takeaways or dine out, but that's still over half are telling us that they're doing that. Around half say that they're shopping for food based on price rather than kind of making decisions based on what's the most nutritious food or whatever they might want to buy. It's price that's driving their decision. That's actually up 4 percentage points on the last time we ran the question 12 months ago. A quarter say they're reducing the quantity or quality of fruit and vegetables in their diet, and a similar proportion telling us that they're consuming more packaged and processed foods instead of fresh food. And 21% saying they choose to eat less meat to save money, and choosing food that requires no or very little cooking in order to save money. And then my last slide is basically these split by households with children, households without children, to show the sort of differing behaviour that's reported there. So if we look, the dark blue bar is households with children and the light blue bar is households without children. And what we're seeing here is basically for all of the behaviours that we see pretty much, other than it not impacting your food choices, households with children are either much more likely or slightly more likely to be making those decisions. So we see that, nearly 6 in 10 households with children are telling us that they're shopping for food based on price rather than health. And I think that's just an indication of some of the pressure that households with children are under. There's loads more data, there's loads more things we can look at in all of this, but I'm going to pass on now to Leslie Ann to go through her findings on the food. But thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you again to Susan for inviting me along today. So I'm talking about cutting through uncertainty. We're now called World Panel by Numerator, but you might be more familiar with us as we recently just merged with Numerator. Before that, we were called Kantar. So I've got the fortunate position in that we monitor household behaviour and we understand shopper patterns. And how we do that is we have a study of 30,000 households that share everything that they bring into the home with us. So they share all that food and drink that they buy in the grocery channel and bring it into the home. The best way to think about that is imagine your shopping trolley, and then imagine that shopping trolley for the last year, and then go back to 1976 with those shopping trolleys, and then mass that up for the GB population. So we can look in all those trolleys and see what has changed, what yous have put in, and what's different, and that's how we get our data. So that is our buyer behaviour data. We also do a similar panel for out of home and on the go. So if you, as Scott had said, are buying takeaways or have got a McDonald's or a Starbucks or have went for a lovely meal, our panellists also share that information with us. We look at usage, which is a bit like a diary. So unlike a lot of surveys, we know that when a shopper says that they had spaghetti bolognese, we know within their digital cupboard, because it's actually our household panellists, that they have actually bought a tin of tomatoes, they have bought that mince, and therefore they have definitely made that bolognese, and that bolognese has maybe been shared with their family, and the reason that they've picked it is maybe for a health reason. So we can see all that lovely behaviour in terms of the why behind the purchases, and we can also look at the changes over time. Because it's our panellists, we can also break it down by demographics, so we can look at it from a socio-economic perspective, from a regional perspective. Most of the data that I'm sharing today is GB, but I think I've got one slide on Scotland. So, inflationary pressures return. I don't need to spend too much on this slide, but essentially the world, the government, the environment that we're living in is all kind of contributing to unsteadiness, and we are seeing that coming through in the patterns of behaviour that we are monitoring. So the first chart I'm going to share with you is showing the spend change in terms of take-home panel for food and drink for GB. And you can see there the blue line is inflation. And you can see that it was inflation that was driving the market back in 2023, 2022, when our food inflation was up as high as 17%. And that's what was growing the food and drink market. It has merged slightly in terms of the line. We now know that we reported it at 5% last week. Our latest data was out last week, and we reported food inflation at 5%. Now, every wee dot on that chart looks at a different category. So there's 134 dots on the chart, if anybody wants to count them. And what I mean by a category is a category could be soft drinks, it could be canned goods, it could be prepped veg. So that's what a category means. And what I'm showing in this chart is that whilst we say that inflation is currently running about 5%, for many categories, it's actually far above that, and that's putting pressure on shopper baskets. So in the media yesterday, they talked about eggs, they talked about butter, they talked about the price of cocoa, driving up chocolate and confectionery. So we are seeing all that. So they're also inflating far higher than the average of 5%. So that means when shoppers are out shopping, they're not just seeing an increase of 5% across their basket. There'll be certain products within that basket that are inflating far higher. That has implications for their health. As Scott mentioned, it has implications for the brands and the manufacturers who are making those products to go into the baskets, because everybody wants their product to be chosen from the shelf. So implications in terms of the different rates of inflation across the different categories. Now, what we know is that shoppers have got options in order to mitigate those rising costs. So this is quite a nice chart that shows how we monitor it. So if I can draw your attention to the kind of repeat buyer behaviour and the boxes that sit beneath this, and you'll probably recognise this in your own shopper behaviour. So if you're wanting to mitigate that cost, you can buy less volume. So you can buy less packets of something, or you can just cut something out altogether. Apparently olives have been cut out for a lot of people's baskets. You know, it's not an everyday must. It's not like your milk, but yeah, olives have seen a reduction in terms of that. You can also reduce the volume that you buy. So if you bought maybe a 2-litre bottle of Coke, you can reduce that down and you're maybe only buying a half litre. You can shop in cheaper stores, and all our data has shown that the discounters, that drive from the discounters, are growing far faster than the traditional supermarkets, which is why you've got all these Aldi price matches across the board. That would be shopping in cheaper stores. You can buy less expensive products, and you've got a couple of choices there. You can go from a branded product into an own label equivalent. Within the own label tiers, the supermarket own brands, you can go from a premium down to a standard, down to a value. So you can change the ratio of brands to private label that you've got in the basket. And again, that has got implications for manufacturers that only produce branded products. Again, you've got your product mix, so you can play around with your pack sizes and the different sectors that you shop at. And then you've got that inflation exposure. So within a shopping basket, there's lots of tensions there. There's lots of differences that we monitor. And it's this data that we share with manufacturers, we share it with public sector, we share it with academics as well. So pretty horrible chart, but it's a really useful chart. So it goes back to 2022. And those changes in behaviour that I talked about earlier, that's what every colour on that represents. So you can see that the yellow has been the exposure to inflation. And if I take you to the kind of far end bar there, you can see that the inflation exposure is yellow, so that's above the line, so that's increasing the basket cost. The pale blue there is the repeat volume, so people are still buying repeat volume of certain products, but if I can highlight that dark blue line and the product mix line, that's the category repertoire. So those categories that I talked about, they're definitely putting less products into the basket, and then they're also changing that product mix that they're buying. So where you've got periods of high inflation, it really impacts what you put in your basket. Now, this is the Scotland chart that I referred to, and it's the 12-week ending period to August, and it just kind of highlights what I've been talking about. We're spending 4.2% more than we did this period last year. Our frequency in terms of how much we are shopping about is pretty much the same at 0.1%. And what that means that all those loyalty card deals with your Tesco Club card, once you're in a shop, if they've got an Aldi price match on, if there's a good loyalty card deal, you're not going anywhere else for your shopping, which is why the retailers are really trying to get that loyalty back. Once they've got you in the store, they want you to buy the whole basket of shopping. When you're there, they don't want you to go anywhere else. And again, that is what we're seeing coming through the data. Packs per trip, I mentioned that earlier, we're putting less products into those baskets, whether it's the fresh fruit and veg that Scott referenced earlier, whether it's potentially a change in terms of the more processed products. Average price per pack has increased, and that's the two kind of changes that we're seeing across how we're shopping for our food and drink. We've also got the luxury, and we do love a segmentation, because we've got these 30,000 households, we can ask them how they're feeling towards the economy. So they're telling us whether they're struggling, whether they're managing, whether they're comfortable. And again, this is a regular survey that we do with those panellists that share their food and drink shopping habits with us. What I want to reference is just even within that comfortable group at the end, that has seen a decline in the most recent period. So even those that aren't struggling to make ends meet are becoming less comfortable in terms of the cost. And what we can also do, because it is our segmentation, we've got all this lovely data sitting behind in terms of their shopping baskets, we can see how they're trying to manage their spend. So buying on promotion more often, if I had to show that chart for the previous year, all those stats are up. So whether you're comfortable managing or struggling, we're all buying more on promotion. And that is, again, got implications for if you're a food manufacturer, for your P&L, your strategy, your pricing, how you speak to the retailers. That has got implications all the way back down the chain. Using loyalty cards, we're all using loyalty cards more. We're all looking for more cheaper groceries. We're using less energy in the house, which again ties in to Scott's survey, and we're also using coupons, cashback, vouchers, etc. So again, if that chart was for the previous year, all those percentages are higher. Now, what has also happened within the market is inflation has impacted the brands and the own label. So what we're looking at here is this percentage change versus a year ago, and what we can see that actually private label was growing far faster than brands, and again that has implications for some of the lovely brands that we're used to in the market. And it's only in recent periods that they've both really achieved the same level of growth. Now, about 49% of the market is actually branded products, and about 51% is own label. That again has implications because how a manufacturer will speak to the retailer, whether they're offering brands or whether they're producing their own label, there's implications again on their P&L and the profitability about whether you're a branded or an own label supplier. What is also interesting is the perception might be that it's those that are struggling that buy the higher percentage of own label, and that's not necessarily the case. So when you look at the spend share on brands, it's actually those that are struggling that have the highest spend share on brands. And one of the hypotheses for that is that they have got less, because they have got less money in general, what they want to do is they want to treat themselves to a brand, and there's also an element of trust. They know that when they're buying the brand, they're going to be happy with that product and potentially less waste. So there's an element almost of that kind of lipstick effect in the economy in terms of keeping with brands, but it's not as you think. It's not the fact that people that are comfortable buy the highest percentage of brands. They also spend more on some of those sweet categories. So again, that could be the lipstick effect, it could be an indulgence, it could be treating themselves and treating their family. So chocolate bars, chocolate confit, ice cream, sugar confectionery, bottled colas, flavoured ambient milk, all have a higher incidence among struggling shoppers than those that are comfortable. Before I go, I just want to touch very briefly on health, because Scott had also mentioned that the fact that health, and we agree with this, health tends to suffer when inflation is high on food and drink. So what we've got here is the percentage of food and drink servings that have been chosen for health. So this is from our usage and our consumption panel. And you see there it was round about back, as I say, 2013. Our data goes a long way back, so we're good at this trended information. It was about 25%. It's now sitting at 28%. And you can see there how it has increased and decreased depending when food inflation was high. So when food inflation was up here at about 17%, the percentage of servings chosen for health actually declined. We reckon that the value of that market for health is about 28 billion. So that 28% represents the 27.9 from the previous chart. But that is what that basket of health goods, if you like, are worth. And then when we look at it and break it down into lifestyle stage, so pre-family, family, older dependents, empty nesters and retired, year on year, that green bar there has actually increased between those that are retired, family and pre-family. So we're seeing a slight nudge there, and this is versus 2021. So this is versus sort of 5-year trend. What we've not seen is the older dependents and the empty nesters. We've not seen that same trend coming through in terms of health. So what we do know is that focus on health decreases as we progress through the life stages, but then tends to rebound when children leave home, which again I think is in sync with what Scott was saying. I also wanted to talk to you about the weight loss drug that's in the media. We have, in terms of our panellists, our household panellists, we've recently started asking them about whether they're using the drug, whether they're a lapsed user, whether they're considering. And what it allows us to do is actually look into their baskets and see the changes that are coming through from those that are taking this drug. And what is really interesting is that it is disrupting our food economy, if you like, our mix of food in the marketplace. So we know that those that are actively taking a GLP-1 or equivalent, they're taking less heavy meals, they've reduced their snack, they're reducing the amount of alcohol they drink, and that has implications, and that is it's one of the key factors that the drink industry is talking about. We know that there's moderation trends, we know that we've got minimum unit pricing, duty increases, etc. But the GLP-1 drug is also having an impact on our alcohol, and the overall volume is coming down too. They're also looking for more and putting more nutrient-dense foods, smaller portions, lighter meals, and permissible indulgence. In terms of out of home, 2/3 of them are telling us that they've reduced their takeaways. 3/4 of them are eating less pizza. So we are literally seeing changes in their baskets for GLP-1, and again, that's something that food manufacturers are asking us to find out a bit more about, and so that they can be on the right-hand side and have products that meet those needs. So that's my last slide. Quick summing up. Amid ongoing inflationary pressures, rising prices continue to erode that shopper optimism. We've got greater reliance on promotions on loyalty cards. We're reducing the number of products we're putting into the basket. So those baskets are getting smaller. That means fewer categories. That means there's a lot of food and drink manufacturers out there that are looking in terms of how they can keep that relevance with their shopper. Both brands and private label are battling it out in terms of that, getting that growth, but brands are always still more popular among struggling shoppers. And then despite the economy, we're still seeing a slight increase in those servings being chosen for health, but there's definitely disruptors within that health market that is impacting the categories. Thank you so much.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here to provide some reflections on those presentations. And very nice to be back here in the ICAS building as well, actually. In a past life, I frequently sat in this room and debated the merits of the Scottish fiscal framework, so nice to be back. Anyway, in terms of Consumer Scotland, Susan mentioned our role is to represent the interests of consumers in Scotland. So for us, having access to timely and up-to-date and robust data and information on people's attitudes and their behaviours is really, really important. So very much welcome the DHI's ongoing support of the Economy Scotland tracker, Understanding Scotland Economy tracker. This is actually the second time that I've been asked to provide reflections on the tracker. The first time was back in February 2023. So I went back to look at what the data was showing at that point and some of the things that we discussed back in February 2023 to see how things had evolved or perhaps hadn't evolved. And I think what really, really stood out was, and Scott touched on this, mentioned the word stability, the persistence of that weak sentiment and pessimism about the future. So to give you a couple of examples, I mean, the message basically is things have improved a bit, but people generally still feel really pretty pessimistic about stuff. So back in February 2023, just under 60% of respondents to this survey were saying they thought the country was heading in the wrong direction. It's basically the same today. Back then, 2/3 thought that the economy would get worse over the next 12 months. It's basically the same now. I mean, just as a side point on that, there are other trackers out there that ask similar questions. My sense is that some of them don't paint quite such a grim picture as this one does. They're not quite so far down the negative side of things on the y-axis. But anyway, this one seems to be pretty consistent. And the other consistency was NHS and cost of living as being up there as the two big concerns. I mean, cost of living has obviously fallen a bit as a concern, but it's still, those two are still, you know, away from the rest of them. So really the message is, you know, persistence in that weak sentiment. And you might think, well, this is a bit of a surprise, right? I mean, we've actually 2.5 years, quite a long time. There's been some big change in theory in some of those macroeconomic indicators. Inflation is more than halved. It's picking up again, but it's more than halved. Interest rates have come down, and we've had change in political leadership too. But despite those things, we still see, you know, this persistence in weak sentiment. On the other hand, of course, this is a useful reminder that, you know, perhaps what's more important to people than those headline macro indicators or even political leadership is their fundamental situation. And one of the things that we talked about quite a lot back in February 2023 was a stat from the report that showed a really large proportion of people in Scotland had very little financial resilience. They didn't have enough savings to deal with an unexpected £100 bill. And I think what we're seeing here is very much, that position coming home to roost, so to speak. Consumer Scotland run a number of our own trackers looking at consumer sentiment and behaviour, and there's a similarity in message in what we're finding. We have an energy affordability tracker, and what we're seeing through that is that although people do feel that their energy bills have become more affordable, there's actually been really quite a substantial increase in energy indebtedness underneath that. So I think our survey very much bears out the things that we've heard about today. Final point, I think these surveys that ask people about their attitudes and their behaviours through surveys are really, really important, really, really useful. But it's also really, really important to be able to combine those attitudinal surveys with real data, so to speak, on people's actual behaviours. There's some really important and interesting work that's going on at the moment to link attitudinal surveys with people's energy smart meters, so that you can look at not just what people feel about their energy bill, but how their energy use is changing. And I think the presentation from Leslie-Ann is a really, really interesting example, again, of how we can combine that attitudinal survey data with so-called real data on behaviours. And I think that's increasingly where research like this, consumer research like this, is going to go to be able to bring us those really important insights. So thank you.
David. Right. I will be really short and just say thank you very much to the panel, and over to you, audience, for questions, comments, reflections. Oh, I can see Peter's super fast, as always.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the immigration question. It's fairly clear to me that on healthcare and cost of living, if you've got a view on it, it's because on healthcare you want it better, and on cost of living you want to improve that as well. My understanding is the data on immigration says that some people are in favour of more and some people are in favour of less. So of the people that care about it, do you track whether they're the ones that want more of it or the ones that want less of it? Because the ones that want more of it seem to put that higher up the list of things that they care about than the people who want more of it.
I think that hypothesis is probably correct. I think that in terms of what's driving it probably, in terms of what we can see from the profile that we've got that are selecting it, it probably is more leaning towards the people who want less of it. I think we see that in kind of wider public attitude research, where we see that the proportion of people in Scotland who say that they want to see immigration reduced a lot between 2023 and 2024 increased quite a bit. I suspect, though, you have a kind of cohort in there who are, we had the kind of last general election vote variable in here this time, so it's no coincidence that I think that 73% of those that voted Reform have that in their top three issues. We can answer for them what that might be. The 15% who voted SNP last time and picked in the top three issues, that might be a slightly different makeup of why immigration's within their top three issues. I think the thing is that we're probably moving into a space where the debate on immigration is going to become quite complex, and it's going to become a lot more about what an immigration system sort of actually means. I think maybe I'm going too far my kind of personal view here, but I think that the kind of political atmosphere for a long time, people have used immigration as something that they can talk about, to kind of talk about problems, and I think that's coming home to roost a little bit, and it makes it really hard for leaders who are not in the sort of kind of camp of it should be reduced a lot to talk about, because they've previously used it as a convenient tool to maybe kind of blame problems and stuff. But we've got a demographic sort of kind of crisis in Scotland forthcoming, and I think that debate has to mature quite a lot actually for next year, and has to be a much more mature debate about what it means.
Anyone that didn't see the announcement of the birth rate yesterday, it's now 1.25%, which is lower than it's ever been. There's one question over here, but I'll go over here first and then to the back.
Yeah, thank you very much to all panellists for an extremely interesting set of presentations. I guess if we look ahead to the Scottish elections in May, I think Reform is going to be driving the narrative quite a lot, not just in terms of immigration, but also in terms of net zero targets, because Reform, of course, are committed to dropping net zero targets. So I guess my question to Scott would be in response to the result that only about 10% of people seem to be interested in climate change anymore. Do you think that is because they feel climate change is now being adequately addressed by Holyrood and Westminster, or because they just don't care anymore?
My sense would be that it's probably because it's fallen off the sort of agenda in terms of it's been talked. You know, the targets of, you know, both governments have scrapped the targets in recent years by the dates that they said they were going to. You know, they've set a signal, I would say, that, okay, it's not a priority to do it by 2030 anymore. It's now, at this time, it's a date far later down the track. If you look back on the sort of data, and it's not on that line chart for the reason that it's not in among sort of the top issues anymore, we see things move with events, right? So like when we first ran this survey, it was around the time of COP26. 1 in 5 people were telling us it was a top priority because everyone was talking about it all the time. We've basically seen as it's kind of fallen off the agenda, it has went down the priority list, and I think it's not because they think it's been adequately addressed. I think it's more of it's not amongst the kind of top issues anymore for people. Yeah.
Will there ever be a time again when health is not the top selected issue? And if not, is it meaningful even to ask people if they want more healthcare or not?
I mean, so I think the question is not if they want more healthcare or not. It's like what they kind of, you know, think the top priority is. I think the healthcare and the NHS, maybe there will never be a time when it's not the sort of top issue. I think it's still meaningful to know that that's the sort of top issue. I think that if you look at the other issues that are under it, one of the things that you might be able to do or think about a bit more is like how is our issue linkage there. So for example, we see that, you know, healthcare, about half of people are telling us it's in the top 3 issues, but only 10% telling us social care. There's a lot of discussion around how social care, you know, is perhaps one of the solutions to solving the sort of crisis in the NHS. So therefore, how do you sort of create issue salience where you're able to link issues with cost of living and healthcare amongst those other issues, and maybe have a debate where you're able to kind of link like housing and health, like, you know, all these things. I think that might be a way to think about how to use that information in a useful way, other than just sort of every time going, healthcare's top, healthcare's top, healthcare's top, because of course it does feel a bit like a broken record, but it's top for a reason. It's because people really care about it and people value the NHS. So.
Just on that, and I think it's Luke Trill, the UK pollster. They've now got health third in England, or GB, which would be mostly England. So I think that is quite interesting, that Scotland remains health at the top. I work for a health charity. Could you tell us a bit more about the gap between men and women's concern on health? 41 to 54 is just remarkable. Is that women work in the health service? Women use the health service more? Mate, I thought that was remarkable.
Or men just not talking about health.
It's been pretty consistent. It's always been women were more likely to pick healthcare in the NHS. We don't know their occupations, so we can't kind of go into that, but we can hypothesize. I think it's just, I don't know what the best way to phrase this is. Men pick different types of issues to women, both on the economic outlook and on the issues grid. They do pick slightly different issues, but not as you see when we split it up. Still, it's more spread out across the issues rather than the issue ordering being much different. So still healthcare and the NHS would have been the top issue, but just not to the same volume. And then on economic outlook, men are more likely to pick things like productivity, economic growth than poverty and inequality and things like that. So that's my way of saying it without saying it.
I've got 4 questions over here, so we'll take them short, hopefully. Go ahead.
So I just have a question on migration. So you spoke about the links of as being a specific concern, and I speak as an immigrant, you know. So what are you able to provide some insights in terms of the economic contributions, or perhaps a different sort of lens in terms of how migration is framed? Is it framed as an issue, and also looking at it from the effects of immigration on economy?
Yeah, and there's sort of like, you know, existing wider research. Obviously in this survey all we have is immigration as kind of a one-word option in that top 3 issues, but if you look at, you know, other surveys, so we've done work previously for Migration Policy Scotland, where we ask people about, you know, different types of migration, so like economic contribution, studying. We see variations in attitudes in terms of that. So I think yes, this survey doesn't do that framing, but other surveys do. I think that what's of interest is, and if you kind of are watching the news over the last few days, you can't avoid the fact that it's been talked about a lot, and a lot of different polling's been done. Ipsos asked a very interesting question that they published results of yesterday. I don't know if they published it yesterday, but they were certainly sharing it yesterday, about what people think of when they hear the word immigration. So I would urge people to maybe go and read some of all of that and see how differently people are approaching, when people are asked these questions, what it is that they're thinking of, and different people have different reference points of what they're thinking of when they talk about it. But I can certainly share with you some of the wider research that we've done in the area, just for your interest.
Time-wise, I'll take Gemma, Richard and David together.
Yep. It was really just, have you in the past sort of blown out the cost of living piece to sort of what individual bits are driving that? Where's the sort of thing, and the link with housing? So particularly thinking about energy bills, the state of people's housing, and that might also link up, because at least the political things in the immigration seems to be about housing and stuff like that. So yeah, there's just anything more you can say.
Go ahead. I'm struck by the kind of key things that come out of the two lots of different surveys. But Scott, if I could ask you, somebody talked about the decline in interest in global climate change. Do you think that there is a tendency for these responses to be coloured by what's hitting the news headlines at the moment? I mean, if every news broadcast highlights Nigel Farage talking about immigration, it's going to be, for a lot of people, a kind of what really concerns you? Well, immigration.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then last question, David.
Yeah, is there? Have you detected much difference in terms of optimism, pessimism between Scottish consumers? So really, it's a question to the consumer people here, and the rest of the UK. I mean, our Scottish consumers slightly more optimistic, given actually partly because pay rises, wages growth here has been quite, certainly in the public sector, has been consistently strong.
Thank you. Right, panel. Do you want to go Scott, Leslie-Anne, and then David? Does that make
Yeah,
maybe
that's
an answer? Yeah.
So I think for
Wrap
Gemma's,
all those together
Yeah.
and sum up, and so we can finish on time.
Yeah. So for Gemma's question on cost of living, yeah, we see people are more pessimistic or optimistic. We see a difference in how likely they are to select that amongst their issues. We can certainly look more into linkages with housing and things like that. For Richard, yes. What's in the news obviously does drive it with environment and climate change. We see that at 20, as I said, when COP26 was on, it was a much higher priority. As it's been discussed less, we've seen it come down. There's also issue linkage. When people think environment, climate change, they think global climate change. Like you said, they're probably less likely to think about local environmental quality or things like that, which we do know there's strong public support for interventions on those. And then I'll pass over.
Okay, in terms of splitting out Scotland from GB and levels of optimism, I think because food inflation affects the whole country, and that's primarily what we're talking about and what we're monitoring. We're not seeing any huge difference that Scots are feeling more optimistic towards the outlook. Just touching on the environment and the sustainability questions that have been asked, one of the segmentations we do is into eco considerers, eco-actives and eco-dismissers, and that's a global survey that we can drill down to GB in Scotland. And we've actually seen those eco-actives, so those people whose behaviour monitors mirrors with their opinion in terms of what they're putting into their shopping baskets, are more ethical, less plastic, etc. We've actually seen that come down 24 versus 23 in terms of the percentage.
And David?
Likewise, not aware of evidence that consumer sentiment or confidence is fundamentally different in Scotland compared to other parts of GB. I think in general, attitudes across a range of metrics are pretty similar. I mean, just picking up on the climate change one that was raised earlier, evidence in Scotland and GB is that the vast majority of people do say that they care about climate change, and we're not yet seeing a big tail off in that, I don't think. But there's this gap between attitudes and behaviours, and people can support the principle of climate change, but actually doing the stuff they need to do, they have to be incentivised to do that. We can't just sort of expect that people's general concern about the environment is enough for them to do the sorts of things that as policymakers we would like them to do in terms of insulating their homes and adopting different forms of home heating. So I think that gap between attitudes and behaviours is really, really important. The one where my sense is has traditionally been a difference in attitudes between Scotland and GB has of course been the immigration one, and the extent to which that reflects a different framing within the media in Scotland versus actually some of the economic realities, faster rates of demographic change and frankly less pressure on public services to date of immigration. You could debate that, but it'd be really interesting to see the extent to which the shift in that debate in the rest of GB does start to sort of be reflected within the Scottish debate as well over the course of the next few months.
Thank you. So in order to bring this in on time, I sadly have to wrap up, even though I've got tons more questions for all of you. Not least two conversations I overheard yesterday. One on the bus was from two ladies talking about social care and how the woman's mother-in-law just needed to get over her racism and deal with the fact that her carers were black because they were brilliant carers and they were migrants. So that was quite an interesting snapshot in how a conversation was going on out of the media. And the question from Richard about, I do feel like there are lots of things going on in the world, and particularly in Scotland at the moment. The recent forest fires were another conversation I overheard, with one woman talking about how much dust had come into her house even through a closed window. So she was wondering about what air pollution from Arthur's Seat and the fire had. So it's kind of, there are conversations going on that aren't seeing the light of day in the media, and I think there's lots more that we kind of need to pay attention to going on around us. Another conversation yesterday I heard between two brickies in the local shop was about they can't get any people to labour anymore since Brexit, which was quite interesting. So listen to what's going on around you, because it's the voices that are heard in this survey. I mean, like David said, there are other surveys, but this is a very large sample for Scotland that we do quarterly. Some of the other samples you see, if you look at them, if there are 1,000 just for people for the UK, it's quite small when you break it down to Scotland, whereas this is over 2,000 people every quarter, and it's a different set of people because the panel that do it changes. So it's not just the same people telling us the same things all the time. The people change. So that's my quick summing up. There's so much to take away from today's discussion, and I just want to highlight, if you're not already on the David Hume Institute mailing list, please do sign up so that you can hear these future discussions. We'd love to hear your feedback on the event, so there is a QR code up on the screen behind me, or please do email if there's anything direct. Regular attendees will know our events are free and open to everyone, thanks to supporters like ICAS Foundation. Don't know I said foundation then, sorry. I did used to be on the board. I'm biased, I'm sorry. The Institute have been phenomenal supporting us this morning, but also to all our donors that mean that we can bring this diversity of thought to you and make it open access. We're a charity and we can only bring you free events as a result of these donations. I'd like to give thanks to our speakers and to the audience for all your questions, and to ICAS again for hosting us. Enjoy the rest of your day.